What if Conor McGregor's next fight isn't against Michael Chandler? Jeremy Stephens is back, and with one explosive win in his hometown, he could hijack the biggest comeback in MMA history. Jeremy Stephens, a longtime UFC veteran and fan favorite, is making a dramatic return to the octagon this Saturday at UFC Des Moines, his first UFC appearance in 4 years. After parting ways with the promotion in 2021, Stephens revitalized his combat sports career in Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship, BKFC, where he built significant momentum. His last fight in BKFC saw him defeat fellow UFC legend Eddie Alvarez in a brutal war, even breaking Alvarez's jaw during the bout. Now, at 38 years old and riding high on the back of that performance, Lil Heathen returns to fight in front of his hometown crowd in Des Moines, Iowa. He'll face rising British prospect Mason Jones in what could be a make-or-break moment, not just for his UFC future, but potentially for lining up a blockbuster bout with Conor McGregor. The stakes are high, and Stephens is embracing the pressure with eyes on much more than just a single win. While most of the MMA world expects Conor McGregor's long-awaited UFC return to come against Michael Chandler, Jeremy Stephens could throw a wrench into those plans with a statement win this Saturday. Despite Chandler having been the expected opponent for McGregor for over a year, ever since their coaching stint on The Ultimate Fighter, the fight still hasn't materialized, and fan frustration is growing. Stephens, who has already built a compelling narrative with McGregor dating back nearly a decade, sees an opening. The rivalry between McGregor and Stephens was reignited when they faced off inside the BKFC ring after Stephens' victory over Eddie Alvarez. This surprising moment generated buzz across the combat sports world, suggesting genuine interest from both sides in finally settling unfinished business. Stephens even issued a public challenge, saying McGregor's time at the top was over, a call-out that grabbed headlines and social media traction. While a BKFC showdown seemed likely at one point, contractual obligations kept McGregor under the UFC banner, halting that possibility. Now, with McGregor hinting at a UFC return and teasing that he and Chandler have unfinished business, the door is still technically open. But Chandler's recent record, just 1-5 in his last 6 fights, raises legitimate questions about whether he remains the top choice for McGregor's comeback. If Stephens delivers a dominant or highlight reel win against Mason Jones in Des Moines, he could generate enough momentum, media attention, and fan interest to leapfrog Chandler as the preferred opponent. Timing, as always in MMA, is everything. If Chandler continues to slide and McGregor's return is delayed further, the UFC may pivot toward a fresh, fan-driven narrative. Stephens vs. McGregor offers not only a new rivalry to promote, but also one rooted in both recent tension and viral UFC history. It's a long shot, but in this sport, big moments and bold wins can change everything overnight. If you're loving this breakdown and want more raw, unfiltered MMA storylines just like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. This is MMA Thread, where fight talk gets real. Jeremy Stephens and Conor McGregor may have never fought inside the octagon, but their rivalry is one of the most memorable, thanks to a moment that became instantly iconic in MMA history. It all began at the UFC 205 press conference in 2016, where McGregor was fielding questions alongside a panel of other fighters. When Stephens confidently declared that he hits the hardest and would give McGregor the toughest fight out of anyone on stage, McGregor's smug and dismissive response, "Who the F is that guy?" went viral. The moment was clipped, memed, and cemented into UFC lore as one of McGregor's most savage put-downs. But for Stephens, it was more than just a punchline, it was the spark of a personal rivalry he never let go. Nearly a decade later, that unresolved tension still lingers, and Stephens has made it clear that he hasn't forgotten. He's used interviews and post-fight moments to remind fans and the UFC alike that he's always been willing to fight McGregor, and that now might be the perfect time to settle things. The story came full circle when, after defeating Eddie Alvarez in BKFC, Stephens shared the ring with McGregor once again. This time, the roles were reversed. Stephens was fresh off a victory while McGregor, merely a guest at the event, stood on the outside looking in. The staredown that followed between the two brought the rivalry back to life and instantly reignited speculation about a potential matchup. Their shared moment in the BKFC ring was brief, but electrifying. It proved the chemistry is still there, and so is the bad blood. More importantly, it showed the fans still care. Despite Stephens not being a current UFC superstar or title contender, the built-in history with McGregor, their clash of personalities, and the viral nature of their past interaction gives the UFC all the promotional material it would need to turn it into a massive event. In a sport where narratives matter almost as much as rankings, this rivalry, rooted in history, ego, and unfinished business, has every ingredient for a fight that fans would rally behind, especially if both men are coming off wins or looking to make one final statement in their storied careers. Jeremy Stephens is stepping back into the UFC with a one-fight contract, an uncommon but telling move by the promotion. It suggests that this is both a test and an opportunity. If he performs well, especially in front of a hometown crowd in Des Moines, it could lead to a renewed UFC contract and potentially even fast-track him into a marquee bout. But if he falters, his return to the world's premier MMA organization may be short-lived. That said, this isn't a typical return for a journeyman fighter. Stephens brings with him more than just a strong fan base and a reputation for violence. He's got real momentum after his victory in BKFC over Eddie Alvarez, and perhaps more importantly, he's relevant again. In combat sports, relevance is currency, and Stephens has capitalized on it by inserting himself into the Conor McGregor conversation at precisely the right time. Even if the UFC doesn't offer him another long-term contract, Stephens isn't out of options. His recent BKFC stint was not only successful but also attention-grabbing. Should things not pan out in the UFC, he still has a legitimate shot at securing a blockbuster bare-knuckle fight against McGregor under the BKFC banner, if the UFC ever lets McGregor take a crossover bout. That possibility, while uncertain, isn't off the table entirely, especially with McGregor's known interest in boxing and unorthodox fight promotions. In other words, Stephens is playing this perfectly, win impressively, and he could earn another run in the UFC and potentially hijack McGregor's comeback narrative. Lose, and he still holds enough stock to potentially land one of the biggest paydays of his career outside the octagon. It's a rare case where both paths, UFC and BKFC, lead to massive opportunities, but only if he seizes this moment in Iowa.